or from injuries, and give them a way to get off of the opiates.
Does the new Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, agree with you about that?
He and I have actually not had that conversation. I know that he too sees the benefits of medical marijuana. He put that mandate on the legislature that they had to fix the smoking issue by March 15th.
I want to ask you about some other issues. The state of Florida had a terrible incident of red tide last year for more than a year, I believe. The coasts along the Gulf Coast of Florida, beaches were closed, a lot of sea life killed. Some point to agricultural runoff as a contributor. What do you see as the causes of red tide, or is there anything that you can do about the problem?
So red tide, is one of the worst that we've seen throughout the state last year. And it really was a double whammy that we saw the red tide come through, and we also had huge discharges from Lake Okeechobee and some blue-green algae from Lake O. And when the two clashed together, created the extensive marine life deaths that we saw and erosion of our beaches. I was out there a lot during the campaign trail and talking to so many of our fishermen that have, that's decades of, generations of being out on the waterways and having, no business, having no charters, which has a direct impact on the local economy. It was a $70 million hit to our local economy last year because of the red tide. So as I said, as I went through, and I continue to say today, that we got to work on the science. What is actually the causing of the red tide? Where is it coming from? And make sure that everybody has a seat at the table.
And you don't think we know what the cause is yet?
It's a combination. We know that it's obviously nutrient runoffs, but exactly what pinpointing, I think everybody's got a piece of the puzzle that needs to be brought to the table. So between some of the agriculture, but also a lot of the development. We've seen an increased amount of development across our state in the last couple of decades, and that is definitely a contributing factor. more people means more pollution. And so we also have seen an increase in the amount of septic tanks that are right on our waterways. That needs to be converted over. And so this is not a one fix solution. This is going to be something that has been man-made. We want to make this better. It is imperative that we fix this, because if not, we are not going to have a state for my niece and my nephew and the children of the next generation. People think of the state of Florida, they think of a few things. They think of our citrus, they think of our beaches, and they think of the little mouse in Orlando. And we need to make sure that we're all working together so tourists continue to come into our state and that we continue to thrive as an economic boost for the southern part of our country.
I want to ask you about the Everglades, another beautiful part of the state of Florida, and a part of the state of Florida that's also facing some environmental challenges. There's a court decision that recently approved a plan by Cantor Real Estate to drill an exploratory well on some land it owns in the Everglades, despite opposition from the Department of Environmental Protection and from local officials. You called this court case infuriating. What do you think is going to happen, and will the Everglades be drilled?
You're right. My comment was, this is infuriating. This waterway is a livelihood of our entire state. 7 million people in South Florida live and die off of what comes out of Lake Okeechobee and to the Everglades area. If we start getting drilling done into that community, and God forbid that there's a spill, we are not only jeopardizing all of the ecosystem of that area, all of the natural life that's around the Everglades, but also the people that are relying on this. So DEP has a few more months to actually appeal this decision. I passed a proclamation and signed a proclamation urging my colleagues in the legislature to ban all types of drilling and fracking inside of the Everglades. This is, to have a little bit of oil that can potentially coming out of the Everglades versus a type of damage that could cause that is not reversible is something that needs to be at the forefront of every Floridian's minds, and to make sure this is a cohesive voice on that this is not acceptable, and if nothing else but peer pressure on this company, that this is not what's in the right interest and the best step forward for the state of Florida.
You are the state's highest ranking Democrat. The state's governor is a Republican, as is the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and now the two senators representing Florida in Washington. First of all, why do you think you were able to win a statewide race last time around when Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson were not?
The way I've seen it is that we talked about issues that transcended party affiliations. I talked about water quality, like we just discussed, and the Everglades and the red tide and the green algae coming out of Lake O. We talked about those and how to preserve our environment and natural resources. I talked about our concealed weapons permit and protecting our citizens. My predecessor allowed for 13 months background checks to not be done for the concealed weapons program. So again, this is not something that's a partisan issue. This is for the public safety. And then I talked about the expansion of medical marijuana. Again, marijuana passed in the Constitution by 71%. That's not a partisan issue. And coming from South Florida, I'm a Miami girl, lived for 10 years in Broward County, a 15-year practicing attorney. I talked about issues that impacted people's lives in South Florida as well, in some of our urban communities. And so made citizens, as they were voting, say, oh, Department of Agriculture, to Commissioner of Agriculture actually is something that I need to pay attention to. Member of the Florida Cabinet, dealing with clemency issues and voter restoration rights. And so I think that when people woke up and realized that it was not just agriculture, it impacts people's lives every single day. I think it allowed South Florida, it gave South Florida a reason to vote for Commissioner of Agriculture, which again is in my backyard, which I think gave me the extra 6,753 votes that put me over the top.